All right. Well, welcome. Welcome to this amazing event. I'm very excited to be hosting this book launch for this amazing book, Nourished, by Deborah MacNamara, who is beside me here. And it's called Nourished: Connection, Food, and Caring for Our Kids and Everyone Else We Love. And I'm really excited to dive into this, talk about this a little bit, whet your appetite, because today is launch day. Today is when the book is released. I have a preview of it and I have thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and we'll share some thoughts a bit later. But I want to pass it first to Gordon Neufeld to share some thoughts.
Well, yes, welcome. Welcome to all of you. I am incredibly excited about this book. I think it is an absolute seminal work in the area. It will be foundational. It will be around for years and years to come. It will be a classic. I am so excited about it. It's at least, I guess, 10 years in the making. I remember having a conversation with you, Deborah, several years ago about what the topic of your next writing project would be. And you were trying to decide between a couple of subjects, and now I can't imagine you not have written this book. It is so important, so timely, so needed. I think every single human will need to read this. I read it as a book of reconciliation, of restoration. It's actually a book of redemption, of righting a great wrong in our society, the tragic coming apart of food, caring, and connection. The Industrial Revolution, when food became made in factories, when it was made convenient, when food and connection were divorced, when growing and eating were divorced, and all of these things became separated. And this is a book of restoration, of redemption, of coming back together, and of all of the focus on food these days. There's nothing like this. There is not a single thing like this. And as I was reading it, I was, well, there's so many things that came to mind. First of all, I had the privilege of reading it piece by piece, chapter by chapter, commenting on it and so on and so on. And so but in preparation for this launch, I went cover to cover, which was a different way of reading the book. And it was stunning. Absolutely stunning. It was breathtaking. It was engaging. I loved it. Absolutely, I loved it. It's a masterpiece, and you've taken a difficult subject and you've laid it out for us with such clarity, such compassion, such brilliance, and such generosity. In fact, I found one of the main impacts of the book, and I'm sure you will agree with me once you get the chance, is it brought out the generosity in me. I wanted to be more generous. I wanted to be a better caretaker. I wanted to restore the rituals. It was like it's like some part of me knew all of this, but you hit me over the head with it. You know, you in the most friendly way you have of doing these things with a twinkle in your eye. You hit me over the head time and time and time again. Um, just with oh yes. Yes, I need to remember this. This is the way you take care of your loved ones. This is the way you deliver food. And so it wanted me to reach to the better angels of my nature. You have that quote in your book, and I forget who said it, but yes, was it Abraham Lincoln that said it? Yes. And it's hardest to see. People, I want you to appreciate the fact that it's the hardest to write about that which is underneath our noses, that which is invisible, that which was always supposed to be the fabric of our culture. You have to have distance, but you have to listen to yourself intimately. You have to gather all the aspects of yourself, have them line up, and you do this dance wonderfully to be able to deliver it in a way that goes down so smoothly. And I have to say, Deborah, you are smooth. I've always commented to you, when you got up to speak, you were smooth. It seemed effortless, effortless. Now, I know writing isn't effortless. I know it takes great effort and deliberation and contemplation, and every sentence is weighed and weighed again and so on. But the way it comes across, it flows one sentence to another. It just goes. You don't want to put it down. The only I would say downside of this smoothness is you don't realize when you've been hit over the head. But you have to kind of let it sink in. I was just confronted there. And and like you're getting hit over the head. And some of the gems, some of the gems that are hiding in this, you say it in a way that's so smooth that it goes, wait, this should be in bold, this should be italics, this should be in, exclamation marks. You have so many gems there, like the thing about, we can't forget that rituals are an extension and expression of our caretaking. I mean, I love, first of all, you say we can't forget. You include yourself, you bring us into the place of, oh yes, I forgot, which I have, and over and over again. But you bring us into that place, and then unfold, how it is that we can do this. I think this book is like food in many ways. It's like food. It's best ingested and digested, I believe, in the context of togetherness. I think it will be best understood. We'll gather our own stories. You've given us a way to remember ourselves, separate the re and the membering, to remember ourselves the stories of food, which we all have, and the stories of care, which we all have, and the stories of love, which we all have, and of caretaking. And so you've given us this way, but I think it's best ingested and digested in the context of togetherness. And I think I'm so glad that you gave us all of these things. You included your interview questions, and then you included about 5 or 6 questions for reflection, for study groups, for personal reflection in each chapter. You've made it easy for us. When I was reading it, first of all, I was kind of like, taking enjoying my part of being the teacher, of laid out the foundation. And then as I got into it, it was more like, no, this isn't the sequel to Hold On to Your Kids. This is the prequel.
Mm.
This is the prequel. And why I say it's the prequel? Because you go to the essence. There couldn't be anything more essential
Mm.
than taking care of through food in the context of connection. There couldn't be anything essential. And if you get that dance, the rest unfolds. And what you've done is taught the developmental approach in the way that there's no argument. Like, it's the only way the pieces fit together. There is no argument. You're either open or you're not open. Some will be open to hear it, but it won't. So in many ways, it was the prequel. It was like, no, read that first. You get a real sense of the very essence of what the developmental approach is, what nature is. And the other thing that came to me in this is, you write in chapter 10, it's 10 chapters. And you shouldn't be able to put down a book in the middle of the chapter, because Deborah tells stories, and you have to find out just, how she weaves all of this together. So you need to read a chapter. So it means that there's 10 days of reading, for these chapters, and then you go back to do this. This is, but in chapter 10, you write something that couldn't be more true. The need for matchmakers to nature has never been greater. And then I stopped all of a sudden and said, Oh my goodness, Deborah, that's what this book is. That's what you are. You are matchmaking us to nature,
Mm.
the wisdom of nature, how it was meant to be at its very core, its gut, at the gut level, at the wisdom of all of this. And I love your closing paragraph. Uh, again, because you are such an emissary for nature, you are such a matchmaker. And you say, nature's promise to us is to help us take care of each other. Caring is our gift to give, and it doesn't require words or lessons or even reward. Our job is to keep the invitation in our heart warm and to remember that food serves us best when it serves togetherness. Feeding someone has always been our universal language for love. And the whole book is about bringing these things together. It's again, confrontation, redemption, and if the impact was the same as it was for me, to want me to, I want to be more generous in my caring. And oh my goodness, there is so much of you in this book, Deborah. I don't think a story like this could be shared without giving a window to you as a person. We get to feel you. We get to sense you. You've shared yourself deeply with us, intimately, in your learning and discovery. You're inclusive. You bring us in that journey with you. We come to know your family, your culture, your ancestors, your childhood, your husband. And we come to know you made pies when you were pregnant over, and over again for no reason that you could think of. And we just know you. We know you. Your grandfather was an English gardener, and he taught you the basic lesson of attachment, that he knew that roots were nature's way of attaching living things together to ensure survival. And we get to know your kids and their stories and the muffins and uh, and I loved Madeline's "Where I'm From"
Oh,
little piece. Oh my goodness, I went to it. Yeah, when you read it, people, be prepared to cry. I'm usually quite analytical because I'm reading this to see, just how it fits in and all of those pieces. And I couldn't get to page 31. There's a little piece on Let Them Eat Cake. And oh my goodness, the tears came. And they came with a Yaya carrot muffins. The Yaya is a nickname for Hannah. It's also the name of the type of carrot. And the last story as well, the tears came, which is amazing, because you're brilliant as a theorist. You are a master teacher as far as a developmentalist, but your ability to write so it touches the heart is something that is rare. And I loved it. I loved your piece on rituals and invisibility, why some things need to remain hidden. I love the stuff on rituals, and I love the stuff on hiddenness, but you brought it on in a way that just had me contemplating, yes, 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 with huge exclamation marks, and I'll just read this quote. What we can't lose sight of is how our gathering rituals make the work of relationship invisible. Gathering rituals hide relational intentions so that it feels like an invisible gift based on who we are rather than on our performances we give. Rituals allows us as guardians to appear as the answer instead of always being in search of them. Rituals matter because they are the threads that hold the tapestry of life together.
yeah.
There were so many things I loved. I love the story about the children and the lilies. That really got to me. Uh, and again, I was confronted in the most gentlest of ways, but I could feel the frying pan on the head, or however you say that. And Uh, and it's garnished praise. One of the ones that I loved on here is by Mona Delahook, Stunningly Beautiful. And it is stunning. I was stunned. I think is a good word for it. It's stunningly beautiful. An ode to love, relationships, and food. Um, it Gabber says, a timely, wise, and much needed book in a society that alienates us from our caregiving instincts. Its lessons could not be more urgent. Um, the book is a gift, a provocation, and a legacy to pass on. It is a provocation, but absolutely solid, and a legacy to pass on, explore, and create dialogue with our own children and grandchildren. Read and be inspired. And I don't know how one wouldn't if one lets it in. And that's a part. If one lets it in to where it came from in you, Deborah, uh, then it's truly something to inspire us to take care of our loved ones, to see food in a way that we've never seen food before, not in its entirety like this. And those who have always done this intuitively will be able to recognize themselves in it. Those who have lost their intuitions will be able to find their way back. Again, I think everybody should read it. I could go on, but it is an absolute honor and a privilege, and it is an incredible way uh, that you have matchmaked us back to nature in this, to the way it always should have been, always was, and needs to be. Well, I need to make Deborah to share time to share, because I asked her if she would give us a little bit of the inside of this journey for her.
Well, thank you. I'm feeling a little verklempt of your comments and your reflection, and found myself quite lost in listening to you reflect on the book, and sort of going through the book again, but through your eyes has just been so wonderful. And thank you for your incredibly generous words, and for all the time and patience you took with this, because there were some really nasty drafts and some things to go through, and just a heartfelt thank you to this entire community, the Neufeld community, and everyone who came out tonight.
I can assure people there was nothing nasty. It always was good. It just got better and better. That's all. It
I was
was
just
always
like,
good.
oh, my sister said there was a chapter 11. My sister said, no, no way, that's not going, that's horrible. And then you said, well, I didn't mind it. But I'm just like, okay. But the feedback I had along the way and the support I had along the way, because writing is so isolating, and so I'm just so grateful, and people were so generous with their stories, and you've been so generous with your comments tonight. So thank you. I feel quite full already. I feel like I could leave. But I do want to tell you a little bit about what the process was, I guess. Gordon, you had invited me to share sort of the inside, a perspective that probably people won't get. We can talk about the book, and, you can read the book, but what is the story behind the book, I guess, is, I think, an interesting story. And so one of the questions that I asked is, why write this book? Like, why would anyone take on this topic? And it comes back to you and my children again, right? And having two children, one who is very easy to feed and one who is not, and who is very picky, as we would say, and very resistant. And here I was doing my postdoctoral internship with you, helping families learn about, helping families with relational issues, behavioral issues, studying this. And then there I was in my own feeding practices with my youngest, creating a relational problem. I'm like, there was no integrity here inside of me. I was in full conflict, and I was so worried about what was happening with my daughter, that she wasn't, as I would put it now, receptive to me. She wasn't depending on me. And I was deeply ashamed that this had happened. And so I remember coming into a meeting with you and saying, well, I do have to ask you this question. And I won't spoil it for people because it's the first story in the book.
Yes.
You gave an incredibly cheeky answer, which I know to be you, which was actually very helpful. But at the time, I
Well,
didn't.
you do make the most of it.
Well, I don't think, you're lacking, you didn't give me an answer, but I don't think you anticipated I would write a book to figure out.
No.
But what I appreciate most is your integrity to not answer questions
Mm,
that parents must find inside themselves. And so when I reflect on this book, I think about the generosity and the faith you had in me not to answer that question and not to be
mm,
tempted to be the expert, to give advice, because it would be very easy to do that in today's culture that is so filled with parenting advice and people yelling from the rooftops what to do. You gave me a gift that was so much greater, which was, I will not answer your question
mm,
about picky eating, because the question wasn't, the answer to that question wasn't actually the answer I needed.
mm,
And I couldn't see that. And it took me a long time to kind of figure that out. That what was missing was something more that my daughter needed to be nourished by. It wasn't about the food.
mm,
And so what you did was you let me sit in my conflict. You let me sit in my frustration. You let me sit in my alarm. And you sure turned on my pursuit to try to figure out
mm.
what the answer was. And it was then when I looked into the field, because I had these
Mm,
eyes, that I realized something's come undone. I didn't know what it
mm,
was, but I was distressed and I couldn't grab the answers. Now, why did I want the answers? Because I'm a mom,
mm,
because I'm a parent,
mhm.
not because I wanted to write a book, because I
And
needed the answers inside
that's
of
the
me.
best way.
And so it sent me on this voracious journey to try to look at the pieces that were there. But what I also came to realize is that the gift that you gave me was in letting me sit in that conflict, is it gave birth to something that could only have been given birth to by that conflict. In finding the answers in me and finding the provider I needed to be, not only did I solve the food issue, but
Mm,
in the days, like, she was 3 when that happened. I just sent her to
mm.
university. She's 17,
Oh,
right? And so the mother that she came to rely on, or the mother that I needed in the hardest times with my kids, was born from that conflict. And
mhm,
so the gift is so great when we are not told what to do,
mm,
but when we have to discover it in ourselves. And so I think that is why I intuitively turn to so many stories in this book,
mm. It's the way
because
you write the book. It is the way
I
you write
want
the book.
people
You
to
let us
find it.
discover it ourselves. Yes.
Because I think I had, because you believe that I had that in me and I could find my own
Mm,
story, it seemed disingenuous to write it any other way.
mm,
There's an invitation there to find the provider in you, the
mm,
provider in me that had been lost, the
mm,
provider in me that was insecure, the provider in me that didn't have all the answers and didn't realize I was the answer. And so I came back to, well, yeah, of course, it started with Gordon and the question he refused to answer, and
mm,
this hunger in me to have an answer. And of course, the answer was so much bigger. It was about being a provider and a caretaker, and how it's so easy to become detached from those caretaking instincts today.
mm,
And we have been, and we are, and our culture pushes us in that direction. And every time, you hear someone yelling and shouting directions to parents on what to do,
mm,
it's like, no, please don't rob them
mhm.
of something they're gonna need
Yeah. Or
for a lifetime.
when
It's
food
just,
becomes the focus, again, this idea, there's some things that need to be hidden. Our
yeah.
relational intentions need to be hidden. Food was never meant to be the focus, and it's become the focus. It is incredible focus. It preoccupies our television, our books, and but the context is still hidden and needs to be revealed and then hidden again. So
Yes,
revealed
exactly.
to us and then hidden again to those that we love. So that's a beautiful paradox of it.
Yeah, it is. And that's the second question I asked myself is, well, what did I discover when I went into this? I discovered a mess. I discovered there's no coherent model of how we become an eater from a developmental
Mm,
point of view through attachment. There's nothing. It doesn't exist. That we have eating disorders over here. We've got celebrity chefs over here. We have research of gut
stuff over here. We've got the myth that the table is somehow the answer. We all have to sit around. Well, you sit around a table with an alcoholic, it's not the answer. It never has been. The table is an incredibly wounding place, as it could be a healing place. It's not the table. Maslow got it completely wrong. He said food was the most important. How many people still say
Yes.
Maslow, food's the most important? It's like, it's not.
Yeah.
It hasn't been. We've got it all upside
Mhm.
down. It was like the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's no culture.
Mhm.
Uh, Things are fragmented. There was just so much information. I'm just like, how can you go to different sections and nothing is integrated? It was, and I
Yeah,
did.
that's chapter two. That how Maslow got it wrong, and I think that your ability to upend it and put it back in its proper place was done brilliantly.
Well, thank you. It was so fragmented, and the integration that was required to sit in the conflict, that things don't marry up. And it was very helpful to do presentations. It was very helpful to talk
Mhm.
about it. It was very helpful to look at it through the consultations I had with families, constantly trying to put the pieces together, put the pieces together. And when they fit, I'm like, okay, let's
Mhm.
pick apart picky eating. Let's pick apart the
Mhm.
table. Let's pick apart the gut. And when they fit together, I had that piece, I had that piece, I had that
Mhm.
piece. And then they started to come together. And I knew when I was done, when I had saturation, when I wasn't learning anymore, and when I could take, oh, the celebrity chef, oh, that's what that's about.
Mhm.
Oh, hiding the food underneath the bed as a foster kid, that's what that's about. And I could say I had an explanatory model and construct, and I had saturation. I'm like, I can use this to
Mhm.
now solve problems. I
Mhm.
can use this now to put back together what culture had always embedded invisibly, that you could catch a glimpse at some of the wisdom of that culture. And it
Yeah,
really,
and I would say even more, like I was going to, as the prequel, not the sequel. If you
Mhm.
get the dance of connection, caring, and food right, the rest will unfold. It really is. And the place of intervention, if something is wrong, the place of intervention, like there's so many things that, you want to teach and it just doesn't go in. Well, the place of intervention seemed to be exactly where there is caring, connection, and food, and to put those back together. So I thought it was brilliant in the sense that it's probably the most usable parenting book I know, but it's also the most usable book how to take care of your loved ones. It probably is a book to enrich marriages. It's a book for all and for all seasons.
Yeah, well, that's a lovely way to look at it. I mean, it's just so central to life, right?
Hmm.
And so, I was always thinking of you in my head of distill, distill, distill. And there were times when I actually wanted to give up this project. It felt too big.
Mm,
It felt too much. It felt too overwhelming. I thought, this is taking me years to do. It was 10 years of research, many interviews, over 50, interviews, surveys,
mm,
presentations. It was an enormous amount of work. And that work didn't worry me. It was just the frustration of
mm,
how does it come together? Like, when is
mhm,
the story going to come together? But it did distill and it did land it. And I think probably because I have you as a mentor and as a teacher, as a theorist who, like, it settles down eventually. It does distill if you're patient with it long
mhm,
enough. If you love it long enough, it does
mhm,
distill. And it distilled into three key things for me, which is one of the last lines of the book, which food serves us best when it serves our togetherness. If we hold that as a golden rule, as a sacred tenet, then that guides us. And then if we hold that food serves us best when it serves togetherness, then what falls out of that is that we must gather first and then eat. It's not eating together, it's we must gather. So what does gather mean? How do we make
mhm.
sense of gathering? And then what I thought was it gave me goosebumps when I saw it and it distilled the third. And I'm so excited about unpacking this further. And I think this is one of the areas where I can be of use in the gift that this work has been, is that food cannot serve two masters at the same time. It cannot serve togetherness and emotional distress at the same time. If we can tease that apart and make sure that
Mm,
food is serving togetherness, then we're going to take care of the how food takes that slide into where we have slid so
mm,
far into emotional distress. But if we understand that there's this precipice, if it's not in togetherness, it slides at the speed of light. It's the most available drug we have. You think about technology, I think this gives technology a run for its money,
mm.
food. And so that in unpacking
And in that carries the seed of all understanding addiction as well. Like
exactly.
that is a huge arena that unfolds everything else, because food is our first addiction
Mhm.
in distress. You know.
So those tenants coming back, and I was just it was just I was just in awe of how, things can distill into into simple understanding that can guide us. And I remember saying to you at one of the conferences, I can't believe, like, I feel silly saying this stuff. It seems like it's so self-evident. And I remember your comment, because I said, oh, why am I doing this? Everybody kind of knows this. And you just said, Deborah, when you have distilled it to that level, it will feel like common sense. That's when you know you're done. And I thought,
Mhm.
oh, okay, I guess
Mm.
yes. And so that was reassuring, but that integration process, it was thrilling and daunting and incredibly frustrating. But I was glad that I had you as a sort of as a guide and a mentor for that integration. I think some of the problems that we face today require much more integration and much more pieces of the puzzle that we're not patient enough to put together. We're
Mm.
so much in a hurry for quick fixes that we don't look for the foundational insight of all the pieces that need to be integrated to solve these problems. We're in way too much of a hurry. And so
Oh,
it's there. If we can sit there and we can just sit in some of that
yeah.
conflict, we're going to get there, but we got to slow down a little bit.
Well, I'm so glad you took the time, because books are cranked out now, like in terms of the writing takes on a life of its own, rather than that there's the message, and to stay with it until the message sits down for you, till it's understood from inside out and from every side possibly and outside in. And I'm so glad you did take that time, even though it may seem like it, but your contribution, Deborah, from taking that time in your life will be immense. It will be immense. I think this has a possibility of truly changing lives, because you change it at the very core level: how you love, how you receive love, how you get care across, and how we use food, which we do every day.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Well, that would be the dream, isn't it? That somehow it makes a difference, right? That's why I think writing is such an important medium, because you can reach more people that way.
Hmm.
And that, leads to the third question I had, which is, how am I using this now? How did it change what I do? And of
Mm.
course, the implications in my family and my understanding of my daughter and her sensitivity and where her resistance to trying food came from, and how to use relationship, to build and to have a context that was friendly for eating, and paying attention to rest and paying attention to people's stomachs. It sounds weird, but
Mm.
it's kind of like you can almost hear people's emotional distress
Mm.
around the table a little bit more. It's not like you can feel it as they engage with their food, or they, move things around, and what's on your mind. And I'm just much more attuned to it. And I'm much more attuned to the generosity and the invitation around food, and creating that kind of dependency. Today or yesterday, actually, my daughter said, I said, oh, let's go. I've been trying to, she's close by for university, so I have the luxury of being able to pick her up and take her out and see her for 15 minutes or whatever. But I said, do you want to come for dinner? No, I'm too busy. And then I'll come for a latte. And then I said, well, we're having sushi, which is her favorite. Oh, come. I'll come.
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
I got
right.
her sushi. And then today I said, well, if you're ever stressed, I'm happy to get a latte with you. And she's like, okay. So she called me tonight. She had like 3:30, 4 o'clock. She's like, can we get a latte? And I'm like, sure, lots of time. So we go down. And it's this sense of just this,
Mm.
food becomes a camouflage to say,
Hmm.
well, let me
It is a
take care of it.
camouflage. Yeah,
It's the
it's a camouflage.
and it's this invisible sort of, you don't have to pretend that you're coming home and that you need me. Let's just get a latte.
Mhm.
And so, but it allows for this beautiful connection point, and it's just that invitation for togetherness that I'm just so much more aware of how food can become a medium for our relational intentions. And it's beautiful. It's symbolic, and the symbolic nature of food. It's just so nourishing as a provider to be able to offer that. So that's really
Mhm.
enriched my life and enriched my relationships with friends and gatherings and whatnot. It's also been, personally just listening more to my body and my gut, and like,
Mm.
oh yeah, I can feel when things are stirred up. I can feel the loss of hunger. I can feel how emotional distress plays out a lot more in my body because I'm just much more aware or conscious, I guess. And lastly, which I've been doing for a while, partly experimenting, is just and telling this story and finding my way through the story, is using it as a prototype or as a template to understand how relationships are enacted in the home. So asking my clients, my families that come in for counseling, what is happening around food? Help me understand, because
Mm.
relational problems and food problems went hand
Mm.
in hand. Now, this
Mhm.
is not to say that parents cause food problems. I think that's one of the greatest myths that's out there.
Mm.
Have a child in a very difficult peer-oriented classroom where the parent is doing everything they can, but that child comes home distressed because they go out into a world that is wounded. That's nothing to do with the home. The home is then challenged to hold on to that child. The problem with food is it's like, well, it's something the parent's always doing. Not necessarily, actually, but it is their
Mhm.
responsibility. But how do we take the lead on it? So
Yes.
asking about food, while it might seem like a medical question or a health question, it's actually a very powerful relational question. And it's also a very powerful way to find your dance with your child when it is so
Mhm.
difficult, when they might be pure-oriented, or they
Mhm.
might have separation because of divorce or whatever it is. Finding your dance, feeling
Mhm.
fulfilled that you can provide on this level. Like, it is an intervention.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's been so
And
powerful.
and and it's a core intervention.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's a core. Like you wonder, when it's not a peripheral one. It's actually at a place where the greatest difference can be made, and the greatest, the and and it's a universal. It's the core, and it's universal. And so when you understand it, there, the dance begins to uh, to feed into all the other areas. There's another word besides, and we're talking about food, and it's on my mind now. So there's another word I was looking for, but yeah.
Yeah, it becomes such a powerful picture that you can just step back and look at. And some of the stories that are my favorite in the book are the stories from counseling, from
Mm.
Pokemon cards, and there's worry bugs in my tummy, and just I
Mm.
wouldn't have understood the meaning of those stories unless I'd been doing this research. And
Mhm.
so when you see that, it's just like, this is incredible what instinct and emotion orchestrate when it comes to human relationships as
Mhm.
enacted and told through food. So that was incredible. The fourth question I asked myself was, how has this changed me? How has this book changed me? Because I'm not the same person.
Mm.
I mean, I'm just not the same person. And I think, as you said, play matchmaker to nature. That was just something that grew. I think out of
Mm.
the very very first premise of, being very inspired by the indigenous work and teachings of Robin Wall Kimmer and Braiding Sweetgrass. That book really moved me in a very
Mm.
powerful way, where she asks, if plants are gifts from nature, right? Then food is a
Mm.
gift. And nature is loving us into existence too. And so, it made me think about how we are a social species, and we think about the human connection. But one of the things that was the greatest gift in this book is that all living things are my relational connections. Like, all living
Mhm.
things. That's what in the last chapter that allowed me to see, and challenge myself and challenge readers to say, no, we don't look at ourselves as relational creatures in the truest of sense. We have connections to our land and our terroir. We have connections to our ancestors and our way back people. We have
Mhm.
a connection to our culture. we have a connection to our body, we have a connection to other people. But if you truly want to see yourself as a relational creature, you must go beyond the human species. You must go to our animal and our plant creatures, and you must see them as part of you and you part of them. You know, watching a show where they, food practices on TV, and I'm like, stop. There's no sacredness. There's no
Mm,
honoring of that life. I'm just like, is
mm,
this me saying this? My dad was a meat salesman. I worked in a meat
mm,
packing plant. Like, you have to understand how far this
mm,
trajectory came, because I understood that food was a gift given to us by
mm.
nature. Therefore, we are connected and we must live in relationship to these gifts. And so the
I love that construct in that book, and the way you do it from the first chapter right through to the end of the communal table, that you unfold that so meaningfully, and illustrate it so wonderfully. That's an incredible take home from the book.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't see it coming. But eating is so much of a relational act. It's not a nutritional act. Food is not fuel. It has such relational,
Mm.
it is meant to anchor us into something much more deeper. And we need to see it again. It did once upon a time, but we're so blind to how we become disconnected and tethered from it.
Hmm.
And there are many
Hmm.
forces that don't want us
Well,
to see that.
well, that's a double irony or paradox in a sense, is that it was always meant to be hidden. It was always meant to be hidden. So because I mean, counter will around food is one of the worst things. As soon as you make it the focus, as soon as you say you must, you bring forth this counter will. Nothing works directly. The same thing with relational. You must be receptive to my care is the worst thing you could ever say to someone.
Mhm.
So the things about connection, about food, and about caring are invisible. They must be invisible, and so that's why they're ritualized, is so that the attention can go to the ritual, and it can be invisible. But that's the irony is that then when it comes apart, you don't recognize that it comes apart because it was invisible in the first place.
Right.
And so it's out of view. And then when you write a book like this, like it's the kind of book, people, it's the kind of book that when you read it, she writes it in such a way that you go, I think I always knew this, but I didn't know that I knew this. And like I often say in my presentation, you didn't know that this is probably the most important thing you could know. And so you need to bring it back to consciousness, then to bring it back into action and ritual in your lives. And so that's the paradox of it. It was when something goes missing that was invisible, like the relational context for parenting, you don't recognize it. And so there is this place of consciousness, but you can't just leave it at consciousness. It now you gotta hide it again.
Yeah. And if our intentions take the lead, then I think this is where it becomes hidden again. If we can find that intention to care, and food becomes a tool in service of that caring, I think that we'll be able to hide it. But that's really the challenge that I'm left with. The fifth question is,
Mm,
what remains the challenge for me in taking this message, this gift of a story that was given to me from my own struggles that found me. Um, and I spent years trying to figure out what is my challenge going forward. And part of it is that we don't know what we're missing. And I'm trying to tell a story about what we're missing when people don't know that there's a problem. Like when people would say, "What are you writing about?" Are they like,
mm, mm,
I'm writing about, are you writing about, oh, picky eating? I'm like, no, I'm not. I am. It's chapter
mm,
5, but I'm not. Picky eating's divorced and orphaned from any
mm,
developmental understanding. So yes, I am, but not like, and they'd say, okay, oh, you're writing, like people say, well, oh, I thought it was a book about food. It's not about food. I'm like, yes, no, it's not
mm,
about food. I thought it was about healthy eating and nutrition. No, it's actually not about that either. And then people are like scratching their head. Okay, well, then I have to cook every meal. No, actually, I don't say that either. And I have to eat together. No, I'm not saying that either. And then some people will say, well, after the early readers, well, I thought I actually knew what this book was about. I thought I already knew this stuff about food because I do a lot of stuff with food as a mom, but I didn't actually know it. And so it's just this, and even trying to name the book, even trying to do a description of it, everything has been this. I've been trying to put my fingers on what the challenge is, and it is because if you have a temper tantrum, you know the problem. If you have a child who has anxiety, you know the problem. But everybody in North America has some sort of food related issue, the experts told me. Eating disorders are the second leading cause of fatality in the world behind opioid use. We don't even know how much in trouble we are. And here I am trying to bring the story forward and saying, we're in trouble, try not to be too alarmed. I think I have some ways to think about it, but it's so hard to talk about it. And what I realized is the stories are what matter, because the stories reveal the problem, they reveal the answer, they make it safe to land on something, and they give us the dignity and the integrity to find our way through. So I think I'm finding my way through the challenge with that.
And the book won't be so much a book that sells off the shelves. I believe it will be a book that sells because it's shared from caregiver to caregiver to caregiver. It's that's where it's going to come from.
I hope so. I hope it's like my wish and my dream for it would be like it's a good recipe, and when someone gets a taste of it, they're like, oh, can I have that recipe too?
Yes.
And you just pass it on.
Yeah.
Because that to me is
I too want to infuse my food with love and my love with food, and the connection and all in the context of caring. Yes.
Yeah. So it's been, at the end of the day, I think it's been an incredible love story to have to be able to have a gift to tell. And in so many ways, that the me part that is in the book is really about the love and the attachment I've been given and rested in, and the love and attachment that wasn't there, or in the places where separation was the hardest, because you can't know, as you always say, you can't know. The deeper your separation and loss, the greater the fruit is and the blessing that relationship is. And so that part of me that's in there is from that place of holding on to both of those, and looking at food in relationship to that, and integrating it of love and loss, and how this intertwines with that wonderful love story that are stories of love and loss, really, I guess you could say.
And you're not finished with this project. Tell us about some of your plans. I hear there's a course in the works and an intensive that you.
The Gather to Eat course. So just looking at, okay, if we want to start to really look at how we embed this in our lives and our own stories, what is it that we need to sit with? Because even though the book is 10 chapters, there is so much more to sit with and to look at.
Oh, yes.
Inside your own life. And the intensive next year for the Neufeld Institute, intensive next year, it's been my dream as I was writing through this book to do an immersive experience and I write about it, some of my experiences in the book, about where I sat in the place where food and connection came together, and what happens when we sit in that place and we are inserted back into what nature meant to put together, because it changes you from the inside out. So I think I'm really excited about, I've got some good
literally and figuratively, figuratively
back together again. And so and bringing this lens, I feel really compelled to bring new insight and understanding of how an understanding of anorexia, orthorexia, bulimia, people who are incredible caretakers and healers in this, walking beside parents who've lost their children to these devastating disorders, and how parents have got to be part of the answer and supported in that. So how do we take that understanding and that lens into people who are doing such hard work to save our kids from
yes. Yeah. Yeah, it would have a revolutionary effect, this understanding on eating disorders. And like you say, it is, when you think of the degree of its affliction, and you're just talking, in terms of those that are more recognized and diagnostically, uh, but the problem is incredibly widespread.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much. And I hope people will also take it and find their way with it and make it their own in the context of their work and lives, and give birth to things from this insight. That's also my hope and my dream.
That's what I appreciate, Deborah, is just as Gordon was saying earlier, your way of helping us step into that place, of stepping into that providing place. And I'm wearing today, in honor of my grandmother, I'm wearing my apron that reminds me of my grandmother. And I was thinking about that today. I was actually eating it or wearing it while I was eating my meal. And I thought, I'm going to keep this on because it is that reminder. My grandma was an amazing provider. And um, and that's what I want to be. And where, when I have this reminder of that I wear physically, it's like I'm not alone. I mean, you made that comment too. It's like, even if I'm eating alone, I'm not alone. And I don't think we were ever meant to eat alone. We're meant to eat in the context of relationship. And I just, there's so many pieces here, the stories that just inspired my own stories that came to the surface as I read, as I'm sure all of you will experience. And there's so many people typing in, oh, how do I get the book? And I think we have some people talking about how you can get the book. But yeah, it's just, it's so necessary right now. And it's sad that it's so necessary,
Mhm.
but it is so necessary. And
Mm-hmm.
and I know there's a little more to come here, but I wanted to bring in this particular question because I think it's timely here. And maybe I'll just preface it with a observation that I had made that I think I shared with you, Deborah, earlier in this process. Was I remember back when the tubes of food came in for infants.
Mhm.
And I remember the feeling I had when I saw this advertisement that now babies can feed themselves.
Mhm.
And there's tubes that they could squeeze and feed themselves. And I just remember being, I didn't know maybe a lot back then about exactly what was wrong with that, but I knew intuitively, this is wrong. We've gone the wrong way with this. This is not okay. And the question that came in is, what is the impact of our construct of independence and the need to be autonomous in North American culture and letting children be in charge of their food?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, you've got the answer there. It overturns the sacred relationship, the
Yes.
sacred dance of dependency, and
Yeah.
so if you overturn it around something so substantial to survival like food, then you think about how that has repercussions in every other act of caretaking. If something so central to our survival and so close to attachment is put into their hands, we have broken a sacred connection.
Yes.
And that the tubes of food, you could argue from, a medical and a nutritional model that, and what's the tube and the plastic and what is it? But what gets eclipsed is that the child is feeding themselves. And yes, they can, but what is lost when that child is in self-serve, self-sufficiency? And that was also the legacy of Maslow as well, right? Like, his epitome of development was self-actualization.
That's
When
right.
you look into indigenous teachings, it was never self-actualization. It was about your contribution as a self to your community. That was the end goal of
Or
maturation.
or embedded again, as you bring out, in cascading care, right?
Fascinating.
This network of cascading care is where it is of
Yeah. So I think that, yes, the cultural values in North America around independence How could it not infiltrate our understanding of food? How could it not be profit for food marketers? How could it not turn into an industry all on its own to save time, strapped parents? How could it not be offered as the cure to the problems that parents face? You know, one of the people I interviewed said, you know, this is not the most time efficient thing that you can do to make a meal every night for your family, but some things must not be convenient. And so this is why this dance, and I'm not saying you have to home cook everything. My goodness, I tried that as an experiment of cooking everything. All I did was I was in the kitchen from breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm like, I can't work if I did all of this. I need to find some ways to help with this, and other people to help with feeding and caring here, and my partnership and my husband. So I'm not saying that, but there has to be a fundamental dance where we must be the provider, or seen as the provider, and masquerade as, you know, the provider in a generous way. But the other challenge is, and if you travel around the world, and we have an international audience here, is that the North American way of eating is being transplanted all around the world, and those beautiful food cultures are now being impacted by the North American food culture. I saw that in Italy when I went, where we hold Italy sacred. France and places that we exonerate as having, they are all threatened. Their food cultures have all been threatened. The Japanese have moved to the United Nations to preserve their cultural food practices enshrined in United Nations doctrine. Our traditional food cultures are struggling to hold on to their sense of ancestors, history, place, and connection through food, because this push, this North American push, is now spreading through the world for self-care.
The industrialization of this to allow for self-feeding and
self-sufficiency, self-resilience. Faster, sooner, better means more equipped, means older, more mature. So no, it's devastating. It's devastating.
Well, that was one of the questions, was what had you observed in other cultures, and is this just in North America or is it not? And I think you just answered that question quite clearly and sadly.
So what's the answer? The answer is culture can't save us for this, but consciousness of what culture was meant to deliver will bring it back, and we can become conscious. And then once we become conscious, we can bury it again and just put it into our practices and then kind of forget about it. Right?
Ritualize it, bury it in a ritual, and
yeah.
And we need a lot of rituals these days to bury things. And
but food can be so ritualized too, right? About our body and seasons. There's so much to hang on to with those things, with food.
Yeah. There's another question around breastfeeding and how, you know, that comment from someone who's practicing, who practices in that area, and just seeing the changes that have happened over time, and how really it is an issue of relationship, and not just food, and not an isolated issue. And she's just wondering how, you know, how you go into the breastfeeding in terms of the book, and how it sets the tone in relationships.
Yeah, I tried very carefully to be thoughtful about breastfeeding. And in fact, I had spoken to a mother who writes a lot of poetry. Actually, I'd met her through social media to share her story, and gave me permission to share her story, Jess Ehrlichs from New Zealand, about what it was like for her as a mother when breastfeeding didn't happen. Not because she didn't try, but because, you know, the pain, the infection, everything. She tried over and over and over again. And we have a lot of material, obviously, about breastfeeding. Breast is best, and I'm totally on board with that. What happens to the mother when it's not possible? And it's an interesting intersection to look at how food and relationship come together. What happens for the mother who wants to breastfeed and for whatever reason can't? The distress inside our new mothers around breastfeeding, I think, stem from those provider instincts that are trying to come to the forefront, the very initial dance that we have with our infants, and breastfeeding being this point. And feeling like one of the things that you hear when you work with moms around breastfeeding is that sense of failure. I have let my child down, or I feel ashamed because I don't want to do this, or I'm using other source of formula or whatever it is. We don't listen on the level of those provider instincts and what this mother is feeling about fulfilling or not fulfilling, or being ashamed around how these provider instincts are being realized. That, I think, is the most trickiest part of the breastfeeding. We have the mechanics of it, we have the health of it, nutrition of it. But do we look at the very ignition point? That is the point when the body no longer just takes care of feeding the child unconsciously. I don't know. I just ate food and my child was fed through umbilical cord. What a beautiful relationship. It terrified me when I had to take responsibility. Can I breastfeed? But it just wasn't about the milk. It wasn't about the nutrition. It was, is this child going to survive under my care? Food is so alarming because it's so close to survival. So breastfeeding is all about survival. Is this child okay with me? Can I be the answer? Am I going to be the provider this child needs? It is the ignition point for our unfolding. And if you get a challenge here, these moms need support, whatever the answer is to food here. These moms need to know that you are tied together way beyond breast milk. It's a beautiful dance, but your sight, your smell, your touch, your warmth, your invitation, the generosity around food, this is a long dance. Just hold on. Hold on. It's okay. You're still the parent they need. This doesn't mean anything more than we've got your first problem you got to solve. And trust me, there's going to be more. So how you figure this out, how you come to peace with this, how you find the graciousness for yourself as a parent, you will need to carry that on with you from here on out. It's the initiation. And that's why this breastfeeding is so laden. It's because it's the initiation and the ignition of these powerful emotions and instincts. And we just go crazy with this conversation.
But you say it too can be divorced from the relational context, from the bigger picture of being the answer and of being the source to nurture. Yeah.
So it's anybody who's walking beside parents in feeding issues, how do we keep our ear for the relational lens, not just focus on outcomes and not just focus on nutrition, but how do we support that parent, which is very much where I was with you, Gordon, when I came and I said, I'm creating a relationship problem. My daughter, I'm worried about nutrition. I was doubting in my capacity, and that is a much more dangerous precipice for that child.
Yes,
Than
exactly.
anything else. Because if the parent loses faith in themselves, we got to deliver a parent to that child. And so food and walking beside food, very much like sleep issues, we've got to be very thoughtful about relationship. But I don't hear that. I hear when I talk to dietitians, nutritionists, I heard them yearning for a relational understanding around food. I hear it and I feel in my office that I'm talking about something other than food, but I just don't have the words or a lens or a framework. I hear it, but I don't quite know what I'm looking at and how to work with this. I heard that over and over and over again for people who are walking beside parents around nutrition, diet issues or special needs issues with kids, with allergies, with eating issues or genetic disorders around food. Like there's a lot of parents who struggle with feeding, and it's like a silent community that is almost afraid. There's something about this connection with food and relationship, the shame or something just so hard and difficult to touch. Eating disorders were one of the most invisible problems in my counseling practice, still are. The shame, the hiddenness of it all. And so when parents are struggling with eating issues, how do we take a relational perspective to walk beside them and help them,
Mhm.
because we will be alarmed. It's about survival. We will be frustrated. There is that push to coerce. There is a search for answers, everywhere out there. What do I do? Do I camouflage the food? How do I do this? And so I can see how we very quickly lose our alpha dance around. It's very easy to lose our provider dance around food. My goodness, you just almost wish that every new parent had that sage, matriarch or patriarch or someone just over their shoulders, just to guide them a little bit and say, just hang on, just try this, and just to walk beside them, because it's daunting. It's daunting.
I'm glad the clinician part of you disciplined yourself to write the book from the caretaker part of you, because I felt like I was like, it could have been a book about eating disorders. It could have been a book about, picky eating. It could have been a book about a lot of things. And maybe there's sequels here, maybe there's things where you go down there because you have a foundation, but you made it a book that like felt like every single sentence, you know, uh, related to me. Now, I'm a teacher, I'm a clinician, I'm a therapist, but what you brought alive was, as a father, as a husband, as a grandfather, that's what you brought there, is the essence of the caretaker in it. And so I appreciate, given that you had these aha moments and these insights, and that you could revolutionize the industry where where food has, in a sense, become the problem, that you stayed in the lane where it was universally relatable. And still, you have something to build on should you go in that direction to unfold this. Well, let me spell it out in this area. Let me spell it out in that area.
Mhm. I appreciate that. It's so big. I have to share a funny story. I got lost. You often say, Gordon, you get lost down rabbit holes, right? When you're
Mm,
working at theory and
that's for sure.
and I got lost in rabbit holes, and one of them was the gut. And I remember, like, I read book after book on microbes and the gut and the second brain, and like it's
Mm,
fascinating, like how a neuroscientist, finds that we have a second brain. I'm just like, oh, this stuff is fascinating. So I said at one point to my husband, maybe I should have been a neurogastroenterologist. Maybe in my next life I'll come back. And he's like, I just, I'm just like, this is fascinating. And then I remember my sister came over, and it was in the summertime, and I was trying to write the chapter on gut feelings, which was probably one of the hardest chapters
mm,
to write, because I got lost down microbes and gut feelings and
mm,
all the amazing research. And she came over and she said, so how's it going? I said, well, I'm struggling with this chapter. And she said, well, tell me about it. So I think I talked, this is probably not going to be surprising. I talked for an hour about the gut.
mm, mm,
And she was so patient, but near the end, I could notice her eyes were kind of
mm,
like glossing over. And I said, so what do you think? Like, should I start with this story, this story, this story? I started that chapter 3 times with different stories.
mm.
And I remember she just looked at me with this succinct sentence, and she says, Deb, what you need to remember is that we don't all need to know what you know. Just
Uh,
tell us
lovely.
the story that matters. And I'm like,
Oh, that's
damn, I gotta
beautiful.
start
Yeah,
this chapter.
yeah, right. We
But
don't
that
all need to
helped
know
me
what you
immensely.
know. I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to remember that. I think that's a good thing to remember.
So it was just, oh, there's just so much beautiful material. Like, there's just
Uh,
so much science and so much understanding.
mm,
But it all comes back to the same place again, doesn't it? It comes
yeah,
back to the same
yeah.
place.
And that's the whole thing, where this is the interface of caring, connection, and feeding. Like, that's the interface. And that is the interface where it came apart. And so that was your job, is to bring it together. And you did your job brilliantly. And I'm so thankful that it was a tremendous sacrifice of time. Oh my goodness, the amount of time that you've invested into this, and still hanging on to being, your first priority of being a mother and yeah, caretaker. So to talk about it and to do it at the same time.
Just so you know, there are some people that do want to know everything that's in your brain.
We'll have a little.
There's some comments coming in.
Oh,
We
like,
want to know.
oh, it's just, you know, and the courage of some people in this field to break new ground. It's a remarkable time to be alive and to see what science is putting on our doorstep. But the challenges, and Gordon, you said this so beautifully in the foreword, and I find myself coming back to it, which is that science can take the pieces apart, but they forget to put them back together again. And that is the critical piece, is that we just can't lose ourselves down there. When I was writing that chapter of gut feelings and I got to the end, I'm like, I wrote all this, but hey, don't forget, we're wired up this way because this is what matters, right? And so it's like, don't lose yourself in the details. The details, we've never had so much, but what's more important is how these things come together and reveal such a beautiful picture, a huge love story of this cascading care from generation to generation to generation. It's just beautiful, and our indigenous teachings have always known that, right? So
Yeah.
I'm
And
just
how nature loves us and how nature gives us the food, and you know, it just, and how they want it to be in the, you know, in the connection. Yes, it is a beautiful love story. It really is. The book is a wonderful love story.
Yeah, one of the questions that came in, and I was, how would you know? How do you know when you've can you give a sense of how you know when you've been that one to nourish? The way that you're describing in the book. What would that look like?
You know, I don't know that for each of us. I just can tell you what it comes back down to for me. And I think it's a beautiful question. I think it's a question to ask ourselves. And when I feel most discombobulated as a caretaker, when I feel most stirred up, I come back to, and I don't know, you know, when you're writing, you put things in, you don't quite know what it means, but you know it belongs there or somewhere. And so I find, out of anything that I wrote in the book, I come back to the very first, and actually I had it out here just in case it came up, but I come back to this over and over again because it helps me find the provider again. And when I know I'm in this place, I know that I'm nourishing my loved ones. And it's in the part before you read this book, because I thought people needed a bit of a preamble that it wasn't going to be about a lot of things they thought it was going to be, and I didn't want them to waste their money if they were going to look for another. Like, no, don't waste your money. This is not your book. But it's from Tara Moore. She wrote about it, called a poem called "The Quiet Power," and she gave me permission to use it, which I'm grateful for. And I come back to this over and over in my head. I can hear myself reciting these lines. And she said, "I stopped designing and arguing and sculpting a happy life. I didn't die. I didn't turn to dust. Instead, I chopped vegetables and made a calm lake in me, where the water was clear and sourced and still. And when the ones I loved came to it, I had something to give them." And I come back to that place, and there's something about it. Just go chop some vegetables, just go make some carrot muffins, just go do what you know you can do. And it's like I can find myself again in the provider position. And from there, I can go forward. And I know it's not, do I know if I'm nourishing someone? It's, do I know if I'm in the provider position? Because I know when I'm in that place, it will be nourishing. It will be nourishing. And what is nourishing to me, in my eyes, may not be what my loved one needs. But if I am still and able to show up, be present, be not preoccupied with my emotions, then it will be nourishing. It will be nourishing.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that, Deborah. And it makes me think there was another question that came in, I don't love to cook. I'm not good at it. Does that mean I can't provide, And it brought me back to when I was in my early motherhood, and I really wasn't that great at cooking. And I would go out, my idea was picking up the roasted chickens you can get at the grocery store. And so that's what I would do, is I'd pick up the, the Safeway chicken, it was called, because we lived just down the street from Safeway. And so we picked up the Safeway chicken, and my kids loved it. And I would, I'd put it out and we'd have our little feast. And when I moved to Vancouver Island, and I thought, oh, I'm going to start making stuff myself. And I started making, I'm like, I'm going to make my own chicken. And, and I did the whole roasted chicken thing. And they're like, it's okay, Mom, but we really like the Safeway chicken. So let's just get those. But but it's that idea that, they still felt nourished, even if I was picking things up and providing. It was the spirit of it, right? The spirit of it that I was providing. We ate out a lot, but we always brought it in and we did it together, and we'd have our special, New Year's dinner with sushi on the floor. We'd have a picnic, and, but I knew I needed to step into that place, even if I didn't have all the skills and all of those pieces. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That was one of the questions that I grappled with. Like, what do we do for the realities of today's parents? Time stretched. We don't necessarily know how to cook. That hasn't necessarily been passed down. I remember Jamie Oliver, one of the chefs, well-known chefs, said, I could never, 60 years ago, it would never fly to write a cookbook about root vegetables. Like, our ancestors said, what you're writing about how to cook a squash? Like, everybody knew how to cook a squash. Today it's like, okay, well, what do I do with that squash, right? And I would put myself in that category. So we've lost some understanding here around how to cook, how to forage, how to do lots of stuff. But is that essential? No, it's actually not essential. What's essential is that we show up to try to take the lead around these things, and we find our way through. And you saw that in COVID, right? How many people returned to cooking and this whole sourdough thing, and how this was a way of saving our sanity in the time of such separation. We returned to cooking, we returned to fermentation, we turned to some of our sacred and ancient knowledge of how we prepare food for ourselves and our loved ones. It's just so fascinating. So the knowledge is there to access, but it's not necessarily required. We are time stretched. We can't solve that problem for parents. So I was thinking, okay, if we're time stretched, where is it more important to put your time? In creating these elaborate meals, or in eating together and gathering your loved ones and truly being together around it? And of course, what the research clearly shows, what's of more value, the food or the connection? Put the connection first. Longevity is way more connected. In all of the research I did, multiple research, longitudinal 100-year-old research on longevity, over and over and over again, the single most predictive factor of longevity was human connection. Not genetics, not food. Human connection. So if we have to have a sacrificial play here, where's the sacrificial play? Connection. It's foundational. It's the root of the hierarchy of needs. It's connection. So I think that's the answer for time-strapped parents. It's
So
okay.
again, it's
Okay.
yes, don't make the food the focus.
No,
Allow
the
it to come
problem.
in with the relational, the connection that you have. That is where it is. Let the food come inside of that, regardless of whether it comes from Safeway or not.
Just call it your chicken and call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the most beautiful, I was just made me think of one of the most beautiful things at the beginning of COVID, when of course we couldn't gather together and there was so much lost in that, was witnessing this new thing. Zoom was a new thing at the time, and it was a intergenerational pierogi cooking with our family, and my daughter was taking part of this, and and her aunt and her grandmother and her great aunt, and there was all of these generations that were all making pierogies together. And I thought, yeah, this is what what we're missing right now, and what we're missing culturally is those. I mean, would be even better if they were all together, but the idea that was what was, how do we stay connected, is to share this recipe, to share. I remember feeling sometimes like I was cheating when I would look something up online, because those recipes, I feel like it needs to be my grandmother's or at least my neighbors or someone that I'm connected to, because otherwise it just feels like I'm cheating somehow, you know. And so those recipes are just, it is about the connection. It's about the food that was cooked. You know, when I look at my grandmother's recipe, you know, when her writing there, and you talk about that in your book and the meaning of that, it's just so amazing. And
Well,
on that,
what
well,
Deborah also does is talk about the meaning of words,
yeah,
and the way you do that is just beautiful, bringing it together. And recipe is one of the ones that
that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
one of the ones that you unpack for us, along with
Yeah.
many other words. And I just love that because I love words, and I just loved what you did with unpacking those words for us.
Yeah. And you brought this idea of the recipe of what do we want to hold on to? What do we want to remember? And you brought these kind of like gentle reminders throughout the book of the recipes for connection, recipes for collecting, and in a way that goes beyond food. And I thought that was just such a beautiful way of you know, playing on that, and what a recipe is. And of course, we're not going to tell you because you have to now read the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, I thought, you know, I always thought about, thank you for that. And I thought about, you know, the play on words of laying the table. And how do you lay the table for connection, right? It's not about the food, the cutlery, the whatever. If we took all and stripped that all away and we tried to lay the table for connection, what would be our recipes if we came to the table with a recipe for connection, with a recipe for gathering? And it was meant to be a bit of a gentle play on this idea that what we're holding on to, these recipes for food, but that's secondary to
Yes.
incredible recipes for connection. And I think one of the bright things that I took it reminded me when you were speaking to Meryl, that I took great comfort in is that it doesn't actually matter. What's profound is actually your food tastes better when in connection. Like, you talk about love being blind, it applies to food. And it's so remarkable that our taste and our perception would actually change. Our chemical sensing system changes in the context of relationship, and it becomes palatable. It's like, oh, it's incredible. Nature has such a plan for us. So it's okay if you're not a great cook. Don't worry. Just make sure you got connection.
You infuse it with love.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, there's a couple practical questions. When will there be a book club? That's just a great idea.
That's a great idea.
Let's
So
figure it out. Yeah,
Yes.
stay tuned. Well, yeah, maybe there'll be something we can do through the Neufeld Institute that way. And
great. Love that.
will there be an audiobook, or when will the audiobook be released?
Yes, just trying to figure out that one and finding. I don't want to do it through artificial intelligence. I'm promised that would be a very quick way to do an audiobook, but I don't feel comfortable with that. So I have to find and get 3 days in a studio to be able to do it, because I do want to read it. So I do promise it's coming. But
Yeah. And and Maria wants to know, will it be translated into German?
I hope so.
Yes, hope it will be translated into lots of languages.
Coming out in Ukrainian, Polish, and Danish, I believe, have the rights have already been sold.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So Maria might have a contact for you. She's got resources, that woman.
sure she does. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, well, and it just, maybe just before we end, and I know you might have some last words, but I'll just say just a few resources, because I know the three of us are going into to doing a series on the wisdom of dependence. And this is a very, apt topic when it comes to food and the wisdom of dependence. So we're excited about that. That's going to be Wednesdays in October. And for anyone that is interested in that, and to, I think we'll bring some of this discussion too. I think it'd be really interesting to bring that in. And it's kind of based off of the conference talk and expanding on that. And so I'm looking forward to that. There's information on that. Oh, I think Robin just put that in there. Also, for those that are concerned with picky eaters and hypersensitivity, there is a course on hypersensitivity coming up this fall too with Jewel, who is just really lovely from Germany.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
that would be really great to take part in if you can. That's also starting in October. And there's a play course as well. Bree, one of our faculty, is going to be offering that this fall, which is also a great topic when it comes to food. And then of course, our foundational Making Sense of Kids, the intensive one. There's just all these opportunities that are starting up. And then also Saskatchewan. Deb was just reminding me that we are going to be speaking in Saskatchewan at a conference. It's also hybrid. So if you're not close to Saskatchewan, you can still join online. And Deborah's going to be talking about, maybe you could talk about it while my dog barks just for a moment.
Just looking at how we make sense of feeding and eating problems through a relational developmental lens. So changing the questions we ask and the approaches that we take, and finding our way through these problems differently.
Thank you. Perfect timing.
Hello, Deb.
There's other things too, where I'm going to talk about some things, and Gordon's going to talk about some things, and Eva's going to talk about some things. It'll be a great 3-day conference. So it's going to be,
Yes.
be quite and 3 hour, we're going to have a time to really unpack some of the sessions, and I'm going to be talking about emotional playgrounds, and there's all kinds of things there. But I want to just give the last words here to both you, Gordon, and Deborah, to any last pieces that you'd like to share about the book before we close.
Well, thank you. I would have written a different before you read this book, saying that everybody reads it, like it could not possibly be a waste of your time. It doesn't matter who you are, everybody, every single person, as far as I'm concerned, needs to read this book, if only for the matchmaking to nature. Like, what a beautiful way of bringing us to understand and appreciate and honor. Hats off to you. You really have it is a masterpiece that you have put together, and I wish it a very long life, which it deserves.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that, and I wish the same for it as well. And I'm just so grateful. I'm just so grateful for the stories, I guess, that were given to me that I got to tell, that I became a medium, I think, for telling and putting together. And I'm grateful for all the support and for the wisdom of understanding, human attachment the way that I do, that I've been taught, that I practice, from this approach, and just never losing that message and all these beautiful details of human emotion and the sophistication of the science of play. But everything comes back to that same place of not forgetting ourselves in relationship to nature, and to being humble in the face of that, and to being respectful, and to being reciprocal once again, and to get back into right relationship where we need to be. And so this it has felt like a gift that was given to me. It wasn't something I was chosen, but found me, and I'm grateful for it, that it has. And wish this book, which feels very much separate from me now, to be honest with you. Feels like my dance has kind of come to a bit of an end as it goes out there in the world. Of course, I'll support it as any
It will find a life of its own. Thank you for passing it on.
Yes, and I wish it well, and I wish it finds its way into the homes and hearts where it belongs. So thank you everyone for coming and supporting this work. I'm so grateful.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of you who have been here to be part of this, and I hope you enjoy. I know you will. She says confidence. All right.